Hi, this is Dave Mathis, and this is our third episode, if you will, of talking with prominent band directors in the state of Oregon. Today's guest, Dave Becker, is well known throughout the band and music educator world. If music educators had a Hall of Fame, I'm sure that Dave Becker would be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's been past president of OBDA and the Oregon Music Educators Association, and has also helped out recently with OMEA as a treasurer. So today's guest, I'd like you to welcome Dave Becker. Dave, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you, Dave.
And
Good to
I
see
hope,
you as always.
well, there's so much to talk about, not only about all your accomplishments as a music educator, both at the high school level and college, but your involvement with OBDA and the Oregon Music Education Association. So before we get started, we do have chat set up through YouTube. So if you do have a question for Dave, don't hesitate to give us a chat and I will put it out there for you. So Dave, you grew up in Corvallis, is that right?
Yes. Want me to go through the whole
Well,
the abridged?
what got you started in music?
Okay.
Because I know your
So
dad was a professor at Oregon State, is that right?
yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
what got you into being a band member?
Okay. All right. I'll try to do this quick. My parents met at Oregon State as students, and my dad spent his entire career there. He was a professor of ag economics and farm business management. And so we grew up in Corvallis, and my mother was a very good amateur pianist. She grew up in Silverton, and she was kind of the one as a high school student that was like the best player around, that everybody used as an accompanist and things like that. And she would play for enjoyment. She loved to play, and we had a baby grand piano, which I still have in our beach house. And so when I was a little kid, real little, she'd play just about every day. She'd sit down and just play for enjoyment. And I'd start, as a little 5-year-old or something, kind of start pecking on the keys and trying to pick out little melodies and things. And so she asked me if I'd like to learn to play piano when I was about 5. And I said yes. And she got a method book and she taught me. But there was no pressure. We might sit down every day for a while, and she'd teach me, and then 3 weeks might go by and not anything. So she worked with me off and on, no pressure, until I was about third grade. And then my folks said, "Well, do you want to take real piano lessons?" And by then I'd been through a couple of the first 2 method books, and I could play songs, and I said, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." So I had a wonderful piano teacher after that on regular lessons, and she was great. She really stressed music theory. We had to go to theory lessons at her house for one of the years on Saturdays, and do ear training. If as like a 4th grader or 5th grader, and I went through all 9 levels of the OMTA syllabus exams with her and the subsequent teacher. And so I had a really good background, functional background in scales and chords and that harmony, that type of thing. So I studied with her, and then she passed me off to a visiting person in town whose husband was working on a doctorate. And she was a concert pianist, and people were driving down from Portland to take from her. She's named Pia Wilkes, and she was about 4 feet something tall, and I was terrified of her. But she was great. So I had her, and then he finished his doctorate, and then she moved away. So I had her for 2 years, and she encouraged music theory too, including as a 9th grader. I was doing exercises out of the Walter Piston theory college textbook,
Mm-hmm.
writing part harmony and getting in trouble if I wrote parallel thirds. So anyway, that's how I got started in music, mainly as piano, and then beginning band started up, and I wanted to be part of it. So Keith Weathers came around. Keith's father, Walt Weathers, came around
Mm-hmm.
rather from Weathers Music, and he asked me what I wanted to play, and I said, well, I want to play bassoon, because I'd been to symphony concerts, and we had classical music in the house. So he said, well, you can't start on bassoon. I go, oh, well, what can I start? He said, well, how about clarinet? So I said, okay, play clarinet. So I started in clarinet in the school system with beginning band teacher, and then went on from there. And after beginning band, I got Harvey Brooks for my band director, and who was one of the biggest influences on my whole musical life, and also probably the most important person that I worked with, because I ultimately married his daughter. For
That's
those of you out there that don't know, Kathy Brooks.
right.
So
Well,
band
that's always one
became,
good way to get in good with the band director, hopefully, is to go out with their daughter.
yeah, and I didn't until my senior year. We were good friends, but she was a year behind me. And so I played in the middle school band, and Harvey was giving his pitch on secondary instruments because we needed, bass clarinets and things. And um, so he gave his big pitch on how great it would be to switch to bass clarinet for all these clarinet players. So I raised my hand. And he said, "Do you want to play bass clarinet?" And I said, "No, I want to play bassoon." And in typical Harvey fashion, he said, you get this really grim, firm look on his face. He said, "Nobody wants to play bassoon. You'll see me after class." And so I said, "Yeah, I really do." He said, "Okay." So he got a bassoon, he got a fingering chart. He played on it a little bit to make sure everything worked. And he said, "Here's the bassoon, here's the fingering chart. Go in the practice room and start figuring this out with fingering chart." And he had me blow a little bit, and just that was my start. And then about a week or two later, he said, "Okay, now get out in the band and play." I said, "Well, I don't know all the notes." He said, "Just play what you can. If you stay in there too long, you're going to be playing so out of tune, that won't work. So just come out and play." So that's how I got started. And then I studied with him privately in high school. There was no bassoon teacher in Corvallis at that time, I don't think. So I played all the way through the band there, and it was a wonderful program, both junior high, middle school, and high school. It was one of the top three high school bands in the state while I was there, and fantastic experience.
Well, you said that it was a huge influence. And in what way was it? And if you had to pick one major influence that Harvey taught you or brought to you, what would that be?
Well, I don't know. That's just hard to pick out things like that. He was really intense in a good way. He was a real character. He was really funny, high energy, all those things. Really much in charge, very much in charge, and um, it was just the standard of excellence. I think that more than anything. For example, how directors encourage kids to play in solo contests. And so he did that too. You should be working on this. But he wouldn't let people go unless he figured they'd get a one. So even, just to participate at that level, you had to really work. And so, and we had some wonderful players in the group. We generally had um, one of the highest totals in the All-State and All-Northwest groups out of our band, and they sat in the top section. So it was a really serious, good band. The guy that was a senior when I was a sophomore, Rodney Winther, his dad was the other band director I had for 1 year in middle school. And he went on to become the director of bands at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, and is a major name in the country. So I'm sitting next to him as a sophomore. And so the standards were high. Another thing we had at Corvallis that was unique was the orchestra met at the same time. We had a very good orchestra under Lynn Lawrence, who was the music supervisor. And so when we were getting close to a performance, the winds that were played in orchestra would be dismissed to go next door and rehearse for the orchestra 2 days a week. And during that time, then Harvey would do all the drill work and, on the players that were less experienced in the band. He'd take all the best players out and work with the rest of them. So they got something really good out of it, and I got something really good out of it. So,
And you talked about one of your friends who was in the band, and I know and this happens throughout every band program, I think, is that you get those friendships that develop in the band and they're with you for the rest of your life. And I know you still keep in contact with some of those band members, don't you?
right. And, as I was good friends with Kathy, eventually started dating her in my senior year, her junior year. My two best friends were in the band. One was my oldest childhood friend, whose mother's mother and my mother would put us in a playpen together when we were little babies. And he was, I grew up with him and great friend. Well, he started going out with our first flute player during his senior year, I think. And then my other really close friend was a tuba player, and he moved to Corrales when he was about 7, and he started going out with one of the other flute players his junior year, I think. And so the three of us all married flute players out of that band.
Yeah.
And this was the 51st anniversary, wedding anniversary this year for the latter person. And then it'll be our 50th in August and 51st for the other one. And so band was pretty important, and those flute players were pretty darn cute. So,
it must have been a great flute section.
yeah.
So you started, you got through high school, and then you went to the University of Oregon, and you had, well, did you major in music right off the bat?
Yeah, no question. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly, but there was no question about that, and no question about going to the University of Oregon, because back then the state schools, were kind of segmented into. Oregon had the journalism school, the architecture school, the music school. Oregon State had the ag school, the forestry school, and so music at Oregon State back then, there were some good people there, but it was really a service department, and you couldn't major in music there. You had to major in fine arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, plus, with Bob Wagner as the director at U of O, I'd been to music camp down there, great experience, and he'd come and clinic our group, and he was incredible. So there was just no question. I wanted to go and play in his band and be down there. So I need to back up about that a little bit to high school one more time, though. As I said, I mean, I loved Harvey Brooks, but his style of his style of directing was very intense and not to say chaotic, but pretty intense. He was a real type A person. He played dance jobs on the weekends. He taught private lessons every night. I mean, he worked. His work ethic was incredible. And on New Year's Day of our senior year, my senior year, he had a heart attack, fairly major heart attack. And so he recovered, of course, but for the latter part of that year, I mean, I went up to see him in the hospital with Kathy, and we had not started actually dating. We started a few days after he got home from the hospital. It was our first kind of date. But I mean, we were working together. She was the band secretary. I was the drum major. So I mean, we were the ones that would go to the hospital and talk to him, and so he this is an example of how he would operate. And in a good way, we said, okay, don't worry about anything. We'll cancel the things that are coming up. Don't worry. We have a parent meeting, the booster meeting in 2 weeks, and we were going to play the music that we were starting to play at the Northwest Convention in Montana in March. We were going to play that for the parents. And so I said, we'll cancel that. Don't worry. Just don't worry about anything. No, don't cancel it. Don't cancel it. Well, how are we going to do that? Do you want the band to play still? He said, oh yeah, sure. He said, well, who's going to conduct him? He said, well, you are. You do it. You're the drum major. You do it. And so I did. And then when he came back to work, they got a grad student from the U of O to come up and take the top band, but I conducted the second band for most of the rest of the year for a semester. And they hired a substitute that was there that sat in the office. But I actually directed the band for that time. Wow. Sophomore, about 35 kids in it. But also, when he recovered and came back, he was really not in very good shape and very negative about the teaching profession. And he was having trouble with administrators and all this. And he told me, he said, don't go into music education. He said, this is the worst worst job you could get. And I took that to heart. I mean, I just, you know, he was my mentor. And so I didn't major in music when I went to U of O. Most of my friends were music majors down there, but I was real interested in history, music history, and theory, but I didn't major in music education. So I majored in music and then, you know, with an eye towards history and theory. So that's what I did. And then Kathy and I have to drag Kathy into this because she's sitting down below here listening. But we got pretty serious in a hurry. And so we became engaged in college the end of her sophomore year, I guess. Yeah, sophomore year. Anyway, so we got engaged, and she was glad that I didn't want to be a high school band director. She'd grown up in the family, and she really thought that she didn't want that lifestyle for us and for me. And so I was not going to do it, and that was fine, and we were good. So beginning of my junior year, I got asked by a guy named Vondas Miller, who was ended up being another huge influence in my life, career. And he said, Dave, would you come out to my school and work with my double reed players? And I was a bassoonist, of course. And I said, oh, you know, I'm so busy. I don't want to do this. He said, no, really. He said, I'd love to have you come out just once a week. Just come out, make sure the reeds work. Just come help them out. And I really didn't want to. And so he said, well, I'll pay you. And I need the money. So I said, okay, well, all right, I'll try that out. So I went out there, and it was a completely different experience than I'd had in high school. Real good band program. But after about 3 weeks out there, I came back and told Kathy, I said, you know, I'm really enjoying this. I'm kind of thinking maybe I ought to switch to music ed. And so she said, oh, no, and laid down a whole writ of laws that, okay, well, you can, but you're not going to do this, and you're not going to do this, and you're not going to do this in a good way. So I talked to John McManus, U of O then, and who I knew, and asked him if there was some way I could switch over. And I was already into my junior year. Mm-hmm. And the only real hangup was that I had missed the first term of conducting, first quarter of conducting. And I said, yeah, I've conducted more than anybody in your class. And I have some bad habits probably, but I said, I know, you know, I can do that. So they let me go in kind of at the end of the class and sort of challenge it, and I could. And so then I managed to cram in all the music ed things in the last 2 years. I took 13 classes one semester. And they were, you know, 12 1 credit classes and 1 5 credit class or something like that. But I managed to get through, and I student taught with Vondas at Churchill High School. And Vondas was working on his doctorate at the U of O. After developing this great program at Churchill, he was working on his doctorate. And so he was part-time supervising student teachers and then half-time high school band director at Churchill at that time. So he was my cooperating teacher and my supervising teacher. Mm-hmm. So I'd do middle school with Sherry Cossey. He'd come out and observe me. And then in the afternoon, I'd go and I'd be his student teacher at Churchill. And it was an incredible experience. Pat Vandehei was in that band.
He was in the band when you were student teaching?
He was in the band. Uh-huh. And Vondas was really creative. It wasn't just all about get pieces ready and perform them. I mean, he was a just total consummate music educator. For instance, and the band, there were about 115 in the band, and they had the orchestra director there at the same time, and they had 2 rooms they could use. So they could rehearse as a select band and then a second band, and they would do that maybe for some semesters or some quarters. They could put brass and woodwinds and have a whole rehearsal with those separated out. They could do clinics, workshops, and always extra room for the percussionist. And he always taught me to don't ever forget the percussionist. So as an example of really creative teaching, I think, they played their last concert in about early May, just because of the way the schedule worked out one year with the top band and the second band. And So he took the two bands for the rest of the year. He divided them up equally. First clarinet goes to band A, second clarinet goes to band B, right on down through every section, and made the two bands as equal as he could. And then I was in charge of one as student teacher. I was the conductor, and then the orchestra director was in charge of the other one. And so we rehearsed for 3 or 4 weeks, and then did a performance for each other and had a contest with judges from the U of O. And the thing took on a life of its own. The kids really got into it. And so they said, well, could we do solos? And so he set up a thing where you could, if you played a solo, you got 5 points towards your band. If you won the solo playoff between the corresponding player and the other band, you got 10 for your band. And then the percussionist said, well, can we put a drum line together? Yes. Okay. Can we have a drum major competition? So the whole thing. And the way it worked out is one band, I can't remember which was which, but one band won the competition for performance of the pieces, but the other band had more points from the other stuff. So everybody won. And that was kind of my first taste too of competition and how that could factor in. That and playing in the state solo contest when I was in high school.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sure we'll bring this up when we talk about how that may have helped influence you with the state contest that you helped organize later on in your career.
Yeah. So, okay. So we'll quickly go through the career. So I got hired in Lakeview.
So Dave, before we go on, just real quickly, tell us, because some people don't know Robert Wagner or John McManus. And those are two prominent names in Oregon history, music history.
Right. Yeah, I was going to talk about them a lot, but so of course I guess it's a good point to do it here. With Bob Wagner, I mean, that's the best musician I'd ever played under or seen. He was nationally prominent. He was the president of College Band Directors National Association, not during the 4 years I was there, but right around that time. So he knew all the big names, brought in a lot of people. Percy Granger corresponded with him, and he was musically just incredible. I thought, and he really was. And we had grad students there too that played in the top band, and I played in the top band all 4 years at U of O, and played in the orchestra and everything. So playing under him was just really inspirational because of the detailed knowledge, and be able to really extract the best out of players. And he wasn't flamboyant. I mean, he's just real patient, and he just dug away at things, and it's like the lights all came on. And I get to watch him do clinics and played under him after I'd been teaching for a few years when I was at South Eugene High School teaching. And it was so much fun to play under him that year and see what he'd do and go, wow, I mean, that's it. It's exactly what you need to say to the group to make it work. Mm-hmm. And he could do that. So, and then John McManus was Mr. Music Education in Oregon. And he had one of the top 3 high schools when I was in high school. I knew about him. And his band had great reputation at McMinnville.
Okay.
John McManus. Okay. So McMinnville and Corvallis and Roseburg at that time had the top 3 bands in the state. And of the 50 or so players for a quota in the All Northwest Band, an orchestra, wind players, 30, I believe, of those 50 were from those 3 schools. One had 8, one had 10, and one had 12, or something like that. So, and I had made friends with a lot of those kids in the music camp, and so I knew John a little, but 2 of John's students at U of O that had, well, actually I should say, John was Teacher of the Year, Oregon Teacher of the Year in 1966, and I started at U of O in 1967. And John started at the U of O in 1967 as the music ed professor there. So he made the switch from high school to college the same year I went to college. So his students, 2 of his best students, were 2 of my best friends there. So, I mean, and then 2 years later, his son, John's son, came to U of O, and he was the horn player in our woodwind quintet. that I played with. So we were kind of entangled that way, and in a good way. And I didn't really have classes from John until my last year, but he was the go-to person for all of that,
Right.
everything music ed. He was great. And all three of those people were, I mean, Bob Wagner and John and Vondas and Harvey were all very different personalities. And I think that's really why I wanted to go into this, because I could see parts of all of them that I wanted to be, but I couldn't be any one of them. I mean,
Right.
I really couldn't.
Well, you take the best of everything that you've had experience with and then make it into
Yeah,
your own.
yeah. I mean, I didn't try to be. Yes, there's no way you could be
No.
Harvey or Bob. And Vondas was super organized and really deep thinker on creative ways to do things with kids in band. He went on after he finished his doctorate and became really Mr. Music Education in Canada, probably the most famous music education professor at Canada. He was University of Lethbridge. So I stayed in touch with him for years. He was really good to me. He got me my first job, and onto the job search. You know, Kathy and I were married by that time. We got married before my senior year, her junior year, which she turned into her senior year. So she graduated in 3 years to be able to graduate when I did. So, and so because of that, our goal, we had to get jobs. We needed the money, and we couldn't wait to get out and do all this stuff we'd been taught to do. But the deal was that both of us had to have a job. So we applied at a lot of small schools and places where there was a chance of that. And Vonda said, well, how would you like to teach in Eastern Oregon? And this was about 4 weeks into student teaching. And I said, well, yeah, that'd be fine, you know. And he said, well, there's a job that you should apply for. You might be interested in this one. So so we applied. We drove down to Lakeview, which is, if people don't know where it is, it's where Oregon and California and Nevada all come together, what the T is there. It's 4 hours from Eugene. It's 3 hours from Bend, 2 hours from Klamath Falls. It's really isolated. But we went down there, and sure enough, they had position for both of us, and we'd applied at some other jobs. We liked that, and they liked us, and so they hired us, and that was, you know, only 4 or 5 weeks into student teaching. So so when we went down there, we knew what we were getting into, and we loved the outdoors. We liked camp and fish and things, and it's a great place for that. And since we were married, we weren't lonely, and it was a really good first job. And Kathy taught elementary, second grade, and then I, with a master teacher as a team teacher. And then I taught just band, but high school and middle school. So I got to teach all the levels, and it's great.
That sounds like a great first job. And I work with student teachers now at Proudest State. And there's something to be said of starting with a smaller school where you're doing both high school and junior high. You can create your own program, so to speak, and you really develop the foundation for later on in the years of being a great high school band director.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a perfect job. There were one problem, the main problem. There was a person that had been the high school band director there several years before, who had really failed miserably, and so he's a nice guy. They liked him. They wanted to keep him in the district, so they made him the elementary music specialist.
Oh.
He did the beginning band, and he started the kids in 5th grade. So he had them for 2 years, and not to be unprofessional, but I mean, it was a catastrophe. And most of the kids had quit by the time they got to 7th grade when I could get them. But the middle school principal let me start kids again, start beginning band in 7th grade. So I taught beginners. Most of the kids that came from him that had stopped playing, I think all of them, I made them start on a different instrument because the habits they had were so bad. Every clarinet player I got from him played without their teeth in the mouthpiece and their cheeks puffed out and the clarinet straight out. And this kind of thing. So I'm not exaggerating. And so I had to kind of fix it from the bottom. The high school program is in pretty good shape. I had about 35, 40 kids. Good guy, had been there for 5 years, but it wasn't going to work unless more young kids came into the program.
Right.
And I worked really hard on that, and I loved teaching the middle school kids. But so by the end of 2 years, I had about 30 or 35 eighth graders ready to go in to the high school band. One kid had a rodeo club conflict, the tuba player, so he couldn't do it. But I had all, and the high school band was going to double in size. But after those 2 years, my wife's job, she had a principal that had some real problems, and she was not happy there at all. And it just finally got to the point where we don't have to stay here. And, it's too far from any other schools to apply for another job to commute to. So we decided time to go. So, and there were some other things going on in the district that weren't real good right then. And with several friends of ours left too. So I applied for jobs around and ended up in Silverton, where my mother had grown up.
Right. Right. She
And
must have been
that
happy with
program-
that.
Hmm?
Was she pleased with you going to Silverton?
Yeah, that was. So, and I knew what I was getting into there. I was the sixth band director in 6 years.
Wow.
And one of the directors had been there for 2 years. So that meant one of them didn't make it through the year. And it was all this kind of stories you've heard about things, getting locked in the closet by the kids and that. I thought I could make it work. And it was a union high school. So it had 9 elementary districts that fed into it. And but I had, could pretty much do whatever I wanted to. They were really good to me there. So I taught orchestra and band, and then they let me do kind of a beginning band, because of these 9 elementary school districts that went clear through 8th grade, there was only one that really had a band program. And that was the one in Silverton, which was about half the kids. So, I mean, a school of 1,000 at the high school level with a feeder program of this basically half as big as that. So, but the band was, it had some good teaching. The few kids that were there, had about 25 ninth graders and a few juniors and seniors and sophomores. So I started and built it up to about 40, 45 kids. And by the 3rd year there, I mean, the band was doing well, and we were getting festivals and things like that. And we had great players, and they're good kids, good progress. And that's where I really learned to teach, I think, was those, and, I had long enough with them and I starting to learn, really more how to teach fundamentals. And so that band was really coming along. We did musicals. I mean, we had a jazz band. I've learned, and then orchestra, of course. I didn't learn all that. So I had to wear a lot of hats, but that was great. And then this midway through, kind of near the end of the 3rd year there, I got asked to apply for the South Salem high school job by Dave Dirksen, who was the music supervisor in South Salem, in the Salem School District. It's Carl Roshkis' predecessor. And I said, oh, I'm happy here. We love Silverton. We've got a great old 1918 house we remodeled. This is home, we love it. He said, well, think about it. And so I did. I thought more about it. And that feeder program was just throttling me. I only got 5 incoming kids one of the years from the main feeder program. And I could just see there was a ceiling there, that no matter how hard I worked with those kids, the band was never going to be bigger than about 40 or 45. And it would always just be one band. It would always have ninth graders in it. And I felt like that the potential at South Salem would be a lot greater if I wanted to kind of keep growing. And at that time, we were getting higher ratings than South Salem High School was from Silverton. So the band I had in Silverton was much better, both the jazz band and the concert band, top band. So I took the job, and ended up getting the job in Salem, and then had to really build that program. And that's the program that you're familiar with, and you were there about halfway through. So I was there 5 years. And that first year I was there was the hardest year I've ever had teaching. That was really the kids. There were some great kids there, but to change the culture of that band
Right.
was really difficult. And what I did was there were the seniors kind of and juniors sort of fell into two groups. There were kids that were really good kids that were not really leaders that just kind of would put up with whatever and do the right thing. And then there were some kids that were leaders that really didn't, they weren't bad kids at all, but they just didn't have the right attitude about, they didn't understand a lot of things about group dynamics. They were real self-centered. They weren't kind of team players. That was really, really hard. And so, but I had a crop of sophomores that which had some real stars. And those are the kids who were seniors when youth student taught.
Right.
Because we've got our years right, Matt Brand and Mike
Yes.
Martin and those, yeah. So there were about half a dozen of them that were clearly the leaders of those younger kids that came in. And those are the ones I really worked carefully with on leadership, which I'd never really done with groups before. But boy, if one of them did something that wasn't kind of appropriate, I'd get them out and talk to them about it. And I'd say, these kids are going to look up to you, but you've got to model this and you've got to model that. And sure enough, when they were seniors, they were the stars. They were the band president, the pep band conductor, student conductor, all those drum major, all those kinds of things, lead trumpet player in the jazz ensemble, lead sax player in the jazz band. And they're the ones that where the band program really took off that third year I was there.
And I think that's important to say because you can't change a band culture overnight or 1 year. It usually takes, if you're lucky, 3 years, usually 4 or 5 years to really get that culture going the way you want it.
By the second year, by the end of the first year, going into the second year, things were a lot better. I mean, the band was progressing well and that things were better. But that third year, I mean, the curve kind of, first year here, second year here, third year, it really took off. And then the students that came in as 9th and 10th graders, because we added 9th grade, after, I think it was after that year. It was a 3-year high school, and then it became a 4-year high school. And the 9th and 10th graders that came into the program when those kids were seniors and played below them in the sections and watched what they did, they got the culture of the band.
Exactly.
And then the stars in that group were just superstars at the end. I mean, the one is head of jazz studies at University of New Mexico. I mean, and that's the band that really was pretty terrific. All of them were in there. But
well, when you were in Salem, who were the other band directors in Salem at that time?
Del Chinberg was at North. He's a great mentor for me. He'd share music with me. He really, I really loved him, and he's a good mentor. I can't remember the name of the guy at Sprague, who is an older gentleman that had been there for a long time. And then Elling Holm was at McNary, and just kind of getting started there. So, it'll come to me.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
The mentor there was Dave Dirksen, and Carl Roshkus is such a fantastic career as music coordinator there. But Dave Dirksen's the one that laid all the groundwork for that. He's the one that came up with the high standards for all teachers, put people on plans of assistance if they needed it, moved people around so that with feeder programs. That's how I ended up doing orchestra, actually, the orchestra director to middle school. And so, but Dave was a great mentor and friend. And then he went to the University of Oregon shortly after I left and became the music professor down there when John McManus retired. So he was there for many years.
Well, then after South Salem, then you went to South Eugene.
Yeah. So at South Salem, this takes a long time because at my 12th year, 12th year of teaching, I was in my 5th job. so I couldn't hold a job. But as
Yeah.
all this great stuff happened there, and I don't want to just brag and blow my own horn, but that 5th year at South Salem High School, I never thought in my wildest dreams I would have a band or have bands that could do what that band did. And we won the big competitive festival up in Washington with all the big boys up there, all the big and girls, the best bands in Washington. They'd invite 2 or 3 Oregon bands to come up. No, I'm sorry, that's not right. We finished second that year. But the jazz band won the sweepstakes at the Mount Hood Jazz Festival. I had no jazz experience until I started teaching, and just did all that just by learning and finding out how to do things. But I mean, we played at the Northwest Convention with that South Salem band the 5th year. Then we did Lincolnshire Posey, all 5 movements. That's what got me, kind of looked at for future jobs. So anyway, so I was teaching U of O music camp, and the summer after that year, I'd been teaching down there, and my good friend Larry Gukin, who was at South Eugene High School, had just taken the job at Central Washington. And we were good friends, and our kids knew each other. The band kids competed. They were one of the other 3 really good bands in the state at that time. So he said, why don't you take my job? Why don't you apply for my job at South Eugene? And, I thought about it for a while and had always thought I might want to pursue a doctorate like Vondas Miller. That was not, I didn't really have long-term goals, but I thought that I might want to do teacher education at some point. And so if I have some success and feel like I have something to offer, I think that might be a good option. So I talked to him, and I knew a lot of the kids in the band already. I'd worked with them at music camp for a couple of years. So I ended up, I guess to be honest, the other thing is I just kind of didn't know what to do next. That I was always building the programs. And that 10th year of teaching, I just thought, and we had great players in the younger grade levels at South Salem. And I didn't want to abandon those kids because, there were stars in there. But so anyway, I ended up with that job at South Eugene. I had that for a year. And then midway through that year, I got asked to apply at Lewis and Clark. And I got asked pushed by Bob Wagner to do that. He showed up in my rehearsal, South Eugene, one day. He said, "David, I want to talk to you." So he said, "Do you want to teach college?" And I think, yeah, I'd like to, eventually maybe. And I was having more success with older students all through my career, and I thought that seemed logical. So he said, "Well, there's this job that's opening up at Lewis and Clark, and you should apply." I said, "Oh, Mr. Wagner, I'm not even settled here.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't sold our house in Salem yet. We've bought another one we haven't moved into yet here in Eugene. We're moving in here in a week or 2. I can't do this." They said, "Okay." And then he came back 2 or 3 weeks later and really sat me down in the office and said, "Oh, I think you really should apply for this job. They're looking for somebody a lot like you." So I did, and I was the only applicant without a doctorate and that kind of stuff, I guess, or I think so. And anyway, I ended up getting the job at Lewis and Clark. So there I stayed for 29 years.
Yes.
And got to do all my, professional service stuff. So I've talked way too long here.
There's just so much to talk about. That's kind of the cool thing about what you have to offer to these conversations. And while you're at Lewis and Clark, there were some things that you got started. You started the Lewis and Clark Invitational.
Right. And that was started as a prototype for a potential state band contest.
Right. And also, see if my memory serves me, there's something else. The reading session, the Lewis and Clark reading session, which was invaluable to so many band directors.
We did that for 30 some years. I did that for 30 some years. A whole bunch of stuff happened right when I got to Lewis and Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it started the year I was at South Eugene with a move to start an Oregon Band Directors Association. And so that was going on before Larry Gukin left, even when he was still there. And we had meetings as 1980 to see if there was an interest in that. And then we spent 1980, we put that together to, we wrote a constitution, we had meetings, about 4 meetings around at conventions and things to see if there was enough interest to get it started. And there was. And at the state solo contest that year in 1981, we had the big meeting with the Constitution and bylaws ready to see if people wanted to do that and start the organization. And so we had that meeting at lunch during the state solo contest, and a good number of people were there and voted to do it, and they elected officers, and they elected Larry Gookin, of course, as president. And this whole bylaws and constitution were based on the Montana ones, and he taught in Montana before. That was where his high school career was. And a guy named Jim Robertson, who was at Eastern Oregon College at the time, was the band director there. And I think he was also from Montana. But the 3 of us were kind of the main planners, and other people were involved. John McManus was involved. John McManus was involved in everything that had to do with OMEA and all these things. So they had elections, and Larry was president, and Jim was vice president, and I was the secretary treasurer. So we were all set to go for the next year. Away we go. So in June, I get a call from Larry, and he says, "I hate to tell you this, I've accepted a college job up at Central Washington, so I'm not going to be in Oregon next year." So they say, "Well, Jim will have to be the president." So a couple of weeks later, I get a call from Jim Robertson, and he says, "Dave, I hate to tell you this, I'm starting a doctorate at the University of Colorado. So it looks like you're the president." So that's how I got to be the first president of OBDA, and then see all these things through. So we had that going on, starting OBDA. We had, I think you get my notes out here. I've got some kind of cheater notes here. Let's see here.
Well, the question, I guess, would be the first one, and it's what came first, OBDA or the state band contest?
Okay, that's why I have to have my notes here. Okay, so we had the first actual meeting of OBDA after it started in 1982, the February concert. So that's where that started.
Okay.
And at that time, we were working on. There were several things going on already at that time. Adjudication certification and adjudication standards were going on at that time. A thing called guidelines, expectations, and limitation were going on at that time. And that was all from John McManus, who was doing workshops on band director burnout. So we had that going on. Larry Graves and I were working on the adjudication system to try to raise standards in adjudication. And let's see. So all that was happening and developing and then sort of being voted on and implemented. And this came from a thing called the 3D conference that happened in 1981. And was really the important factor in this. They met and had sessions, and I was part of it. They took 25 music educators, and they met and had 3 days of input from futurists and leaders in music education, politicians, and things, about what the world was going to be like at the end of the 80s. And then we came back and had another 3 days, breaking into groups and figuring out goals for OMEA for the next 10 years. And they came up with all kinds of things, but the thing that I was interested in was improving standards in the state, performance standards, and particularly in band, because I didn't know the choir scene as well, but how to do that. And I had by then I was doing a lot of judging. I'd been to a lot of festivals. I'd seen how competition works and how it doesn't work. And we had no history of that in Oregon, except for the old Wilco League or Mount Hood League that had a league festival. Most of the festivals, a lot of them weren't even adjudicated back in the 80s. So we had a committee on that, and part of that was the possibility of a state band contest. And so we were developing what that might look like. And then two two big things had happened. One was we have a state band contest today, an orchestra and choir contest, because of the dance and drill organizations in Oregon. There were two competing dance drill groups that had state championships. And OSAA oversaw all these activities. They really didn't have much to do with them, but they were the Activities Association. Principals got tired of their dance and drill instructors coming to them and saying, I need money to go to the state competition. And they'd say, well, wasn't that last month? And they said, oh no, that's the other organization. Yeah. And a big uproar. And so the upshot was that OSAA took over really managing music, dance, what am I missing? Theater, speech, over managing all that. So then to do that, they needed a person do activities. And
Hey, Dave, I'm going to stop you just for a second because I'm having a problem with the computer. If I can fit, so let me be back in 1 minute so everyone can get a drink of ice or something. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, hopefully that will help things out.
Okay, all right. So the other it was we got some feedback or something there. The other thing that was going to was this burnout business, and so John McManus had put together from his workshops with working with OBDA some guidelines on what was appropriate for bands, how much was enough, and really that was because of Title IX. With equity in women's athletics. And there were some times in there in the late 70s where the demands just became unreasonable on band directors with trying to make it really equal. So you got to have the band at all the boys basketball games and all the girls basketball games. And then you've got to have, and there really was a problem with burnout. And I support women's athletics totally, but they needed to find a way to make it manageable for people and put on a musical and do marching and do, so John put that together and we endorsed it with OBDA and had a lot of input in it. And then we presented it, and John and I presented that. I was the representative to OSAA. So John and I presented that to OSAA, got them to endorse it. And I mean, it had this is an appropriate number of things to do. A band should, maybe doing one musical every other year is enough. And they were just guidelines. Mm-hmm. So they were in place for a year. They were published in the MENC journal. They got a lot of national attention. And then a year later, OSAA unendorsed them because they said, well, we're in the business of rules. And, and these are guidelines. And some of your band directors are using this as in budget negotiations and in contract negotiations. And that was not the intent of them at all. But John went ahead and published that through MENC. I think it's still in print, band guidelines, expectations, limitations. And so that was a good outcome out of that. And then, we moved on with the state band contest and modeled that. Which I can do this pretty quickly. During the second 3D conference meeting, where all this stuff had been approved, and I was the chairman of the standards project, and I talked to some people. It was at an OMEA meeting where we did this finalization, and started talking to some of these high school band directors. I said, well, what would you think about a high school competitive contest, some kind of competition? On the same philosophy as our state solo contest was, where just the top groups are given public notification, rewarded, and the others know where they are, but nobody publishes that. And to really honor excellence and showcase excellence. And so they said yes. Everybody was really enthusiastic about it. That I talked to, and most of the leading band directors in the state were around there. So then they hired Mike Walmark, and I wasn't on the search committee, but I was the OMEA representative to OSAA. So when Mike came on board, he wanted to meet with me, and so because we were going to put the state band contest together, or not, we were going to put it together. We were going to run the state solo contest together that OMEA had been running, and now OSA was going to do that. And I was state vice president for OMEA then, and that's the job of that person, was to do state solo contest. So we did the state solo contest together in 1981, yes. And he said, when I first met with him, he said, "Well, is there anything else OSA could do for music besides run the state solo contest?" Because he says he had a music background, a tuba player from Lewis and Clark College, and he said, "Well, what else? Is there anything?" And I said, "Well, there's been some talk about a state band contest. Would OSA be interested in doing that?" And he said, "I think that would be perfect. It should have orchestra too." I said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Yeah, and probably choir." I haven't said anything about choir, but they were sort of tagging along doing things with us as we went. But so that's how that got started, was basically that conversation that we had. So that year, then Rail Maddox, who was a past president of OMEA, a band director from Ashland, great band director, and I and Mike Walmark wrote the rules for the state band contest. And basically what I told Mike at the beginning, I said, I'm doing this stuff already with Lewis and Clark, with the band contest I started there. We just acknowledged the first 3 places. We have 36 groups. It was really successful. We bring in some out-of-state judges. It's really a successful festival, and I've been doing it for a couple of years. And I said, I'll give you our date. It's the first weekend in May. It's 2 weeks after the state solo contest, and it's a really good time. It's the end of the season, kind of, and you can have the date if you want. And I'll just take my festival and I'll move it into February and be a qualifying festival for it. So that's what I did. And for the next 30 or however many, 20 some years that we had it, that's what it was. So that's how it worked when we started that first year. And we finally got it going in 87. And I was the chair for those first 3 years. And then John Delaney did it for about 7 years. And then John Delaney, I did it again for a while. And Chuck's done it Chuck Bolton's done it for years and years.
And tell us who John Delaney is.
Oh, John Delaney was a high school band director, but he owned Will's Music in Salem, and stayed involved after he sold the store. Stayed involved in education as an administrator and worked in the Salem district with student teachers and things. And he was one of John McManus's students, I guess. He taught at McMinnville when John McManus was there.
And where was the first state band contest held?
That was at Oregon State. That was at University of Oregon. And it was in 2 sites. It was at the Hult Center, which I was insistent on if we could get it. Yeah. That was way cool. And then the smaller schools were in Bell Hall at the U of O. So we had just one day with the large schools in the big Silva Hall so it's pretty special, but it was very expensive.
Yes. And yeah.
They wouldn't book it ahead very far. So OSAA wanted permanence and got a great contract with OSU. And that's been there ever since. And it's been just a real joy to be part of that.
So what do you see as the biggest difference from the first state band contest up until last year's contest? What has been the thing that's changed the most, and things that are the same?
That's a good question. The quality of performance has definitely gone up. And I think any of the older band directors that have been there a lot would everybody I've ever talked to echoes that. There's no question. The first year, Roseburg High School, which is very good. Roseburg High School, 3rd place. and Todd Zimbelman was the first trumpet player in that band.
Oh.
And yeah, and their big number, their big piece was Variations on a Korean Folk Song by John Barnes Chance, which is a great piece. But the level of difficulty on that isn't anything compared to what we're hearing from most of the the large schools now.
Right.
And that's not taking anything away from their performance; it's really good. But I mean, the level of literature and what it's done is all the things I hoped it would. I mean, it's kind of my baby in some ways because I've been with it the whole time and was right there at the right time to kind of punch the right buttons to get it off the ground. And what it's done, it changed the culture in this state away from jazz festivals because that was the problem back when I was teaching high school. For South Salem High School, we went to the District 1 festival. We played for the bus drivers and a chaperone or two
Yeah.
in Bell Hall, and two judges gave us a 1 for a pretty good performance. And we did some sight reading and we got in the bus and went home. That was that was it for them. There was nothing else you could do really. But yet my jazz band, went to 3 or 4 and then ultimately up to 3 or 4 or 5 competitive jazz festivals. And jazz bands were in the curriculum by then. So they, and they should have been. I mean, that was all good. But the concert bands were becoming the second bands in some schools.
Right.
And
Right.
feeder program into South Salem was that way. If the kids coming in from that program that had been in the jazz band, if they didn't make the top jazz band, which there was no way they mostly could, I mean, because I had some really, good players in there, and so they would quit. They'd quit band. They didn't want to be in the concert band. So I turned that around really fast, and that I felt that needed to be done if there was some way it could be done for the state, and that's really happened. And the average, I would say, the average serious high school concert band now in the state goes to 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes additional not contests but festivals, and the festival clinicians and the critique they get is really taken seriously. They want to know what to do to get better, and we kind of had that before, but it was just kind of like, well, yeah, good job, and then you didn't play that music anymore usually. So the level of extra effort that's gone into it, and not just to win trophies or anything, but I mean, I've done a lot of clinics with bands over the years, and not so much recently, but I mean, those were fun to do when the state band contest was in play, because I mean, they go, okay, well, what should we do? What do we need to fix? And that's the way I was when I was teaching high school. I'd bring Bob Musser in, or people like that from Washington. These incredible college programs, and I wanted to know. I mean, well, okay, I think I'm doing okay, but what do I need to do? I didn't want it sugar coated.
And I think that's really important, especially for young teachers, because there'll be young teachers, they may not have the best bands or they're as experienced, and they're the ones who should be having people come in and give them the ideas of what to do or what they can do. And even when I was at Lake Oswego, I still had you come in and I was still learning. I never stopped learning.
Another set of ears in the room, and I think that a lot of the groups are doing that. The other thing too that I learned with the jazz bands, and I hope directors are good at, I hope they think about it a lot, is how to use competition very carefully as a tool with goal setting. And for some groups, getting into the state band contest is a great goal. Let's see if we get in. And that's the way the state solo contest was. Just to get to be in it was a huge deal, especially early on. They limited the size of the contestants. There were only 80 players and singers in the first one. I was in the first one, 1966. OSAA had stopped all competitive music competitions in 1950 because it got too big. They had 3,300 students and teachers show up in Klamath Falls in 1949 and then in Eugene in 1950. and they just stopped it. They said absolutely forbidden, no more state events for music.
Yeah, and
So
that's something that I don't think people realize is that there was a state band contest for. When did it start? Do you remember?
in 1937, around in there, and then went through up to 1950. And you know, this our high school band movement was built on those competitions back in the 20s and 30s, especially around the country. Music industry um, would sponsor the big contests and the national contests. So that was how band directors back in the early days would get support for their program. You know, they'd go and play at the college or the state festival and get beat by the town down the road and go back tell their principal and say, you know, how'd you do? Well, we got second. Well, who won? The down the road. Why'd they win? You have a good band. Why'd they win? He said, well, they had timpani, and we got dinged because we didn't have the instruments. Well, where do you get timpani? What do they cost? And that's really a true kind of way that bands got funded and bands got upgraded. And so, you know,
Well, we're running close to over, but that's okay. And I've got a couple more questions, but if anybody has a question that is watching this live stream, go ahead and put it into the chat and we can ask Dave. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you just may have already answered it. In all of your years of teaching and being involved in music education, what has been your proudest accomplishment?
um, my proudest, there's no question, marrying my high school band director's daughter and being with her for over 50 years and having two children that are both music educators that are very good and we are just extremely proud of. Allison Hedgepeth, our daughter, is the general music specialist, elementary music specialist at Forest Hills in Lake Oswego, and has taught in Kansas and in Southern California. And son Andy is choir director at Conestoga Middle School in Beaverton School District, and he's been at Park Rose and in Washington. So,
well, and you have the extended family as well, with Ben Brooks being your brother-in-law.
yeah, Uncle Benny.
Yeah, and Jennifer Brooks is your. Yeah, so it just kind of goes on and on. And
he was married in our house, and I played the wedding march and piano for the wedding. So I guess the advice too to give directors is if they're new to the state, be careful. Don't say bad things about people because there's a lot of kind of intertwined relationships in the state. A lot of fun. I can't think of a greater group of people to have been able to work with through my career. That's what really drew me to all this professional work. I just enjoyed the people so much.
And we cannot, as a state, thank you for everything that you've done. And of course, Kathy has been instrumental in helping you with everything you've been doing with music education, as well as being an elementary school teacher for many years. You've also done some conducting with adult groups, and that's what you're doing right now with the Millennium Band.
Yeah, that's it. If we could.
Yeah.
I did one concert and the rest of the season's been canceled. But yeah, I've been involved with adult bands my whole since college. I played in the Eugene Wind Ensemble that Bob Becker conducted. I subbed in it, and I conducted the Oregon Symphonic Band. I'm a charter member of that. I'm a charter member of the Salem Concert Band, which is now called something else. But you know, I really believe in it. And of all the things that I'm doing now in retirement, I've stopped doing a lot of the things I've been doing every year. I kind of do a little less, but that's the thing that's giving me the most satisfaction is working with conducting and working with adults.
Well, that, and now you have a home in Manzanita where you're close to your other passion, which is fishing. And if people don't know, you've got the best name for a fishing boat.
Kathy helped dream that up when we were out fishing on Tillamook Bay one day. So it's Major Scales. So you can take that. because especially instrumentalists, especially band directors, you can never spend too much time on major scale.
And for my final question, what is the biggest fish that's ever been caught in your boat, and who was it by?
That would be me, a 45-pound Chinook in Tillamook Bay.
Well, you've been so informative. It's been great talking to you. Next week, and it's going to be next Tuesday, we're also going to be having, I think, another fun interview, and that is going to be with Dick Elliott. Dick Elliott was the band director at Newburgh High School for many years, and then has just finished working with George Fox University. So Dick will be with us next Tuesday at noon. We're back to our noon time. So Dave, thank you so much. Say hi to Kathy for me, and Allison and Andy, and thank you for a great interview.
Well, thank you. Good. Take care.
Thank you.